Hello everyone, welcome to my video tutorial on how to make some models, just kind of like in the vein of how I've been doing them. So if you look at all my tutorial or all my videos and you think, oh, those look cool, then this video is kind of for you. So basically I want to start with where I start. So I usually just look at reference images and I see what looks complex, what looks too simple. I just try to iron out exactly what my style is, because if I don't plan ahead of time, I always end up failing. So it's always a good idea to just let those ideas just ferment in your mind and think, okay, so I want something that looks like this or this. It's kind of hard to see. Like this. Maybe this is a bit too simple, or maybe you'll have ones that are just plain, just planes, and then you'll think, okay, I want to do the texture for this or whatever. You have to kind of delineate what you're going to do for the texture and the modeling ahead of time. Otherwise, you'll end up modeling something super complex, kind of like this, and then you won't know how to texture it. So just keep in mind what certain things are going to be colored, or what certain normal maps you're going to put on. So for this tutorial, I'm going to be using the 3ds to Substance Painter, possibly to ZBrush pipeline, and I'll show you how to implement it as well into the Unreal Engine. Let me know if you want a Unity tutorial. But yeah, I just look at all these reference images and I think, okay, so I really like this transition piece. It looks like a doorway. In fact, there's the other door. So I just kind of look at these and see, okay, this looks about the right complexity for like a really kind of simple wall. But what you have to keep in mind too is the lighting sells a lot of it. So what they don't really teach you in the modeling class is like how much lighting really makes a difference in your models, because you can make a box look really, really good. So and this is like way too much complexity. This is actually what I shoot for sometimes, but I actually don't fully like finish it, because I only have 4 weeks and this probably took a couple months at least. But notice how there's a lot of repeating elements. There's even these railings. Even in complex scenes, there's a lot of repeating elements, like these lights. So it's always important to make sure to work in a modular pipeline. Otherwise, you'll be like doing unnecessary amounts of work. Like this person probably just put this on as a decal later, so they didn't have to make a whole separate texture for it. Maybe these are decals too. This is obviously the same one. Yeah, you have a lot of repeating elements. So this is kind of the cheat code that modelers use a lot of the time, just to save time. And it's good to gather a lot of various references from the modeling stages to the texturing stages. This somewhat shows the behind the scenes with all the wireframes. Keep in mind though, these are triangles. They are triangulated for the game engine. And you really don't want to have triangles because you want to model in quads, because then they'll subdivide into triangles. You can see this is pretty complex almost for no reason, so you want to be careful about your source images, paying attention to them. And this is probably a bit too simple, probably a bit too stylized, but what we can glean from this is that there's a lot of color at play here. So you have a lot of indentations, which you can do in ZBrush or Substance Painter, or sorry, Substance Painter. You really want to pay attention to the indentations, some of the paneling, the color scheme as well. So this has a pretty good color scheme. This is about what we want to have in the end, but not necessarily what we want to shoot for, because if we shoot for more complex than we need to, we'll always end up with better looking things than if we shot for this. Then it ends up looking a bit too simple. So without further ado, I actually started putting these into 3ds Max. So go ahead and fire up 3ds Max, and I'm just going to use image planes, and I'm going to shift copy. So press shift and then drag out about 3. I pick the top 3 just because it's a lot easier for me to kind of wrap my head around than like 10 different freaking images. I'm trying to like understand exactly how to combine each one. So what I'm gonna try to do is model out maybe a wall and a transition piece if I want to. And so I just clicked out a standard. You click out a bitmap, it'll ask you what image you want. You'll plug that into the diffuse color, and then you'll click and drag it onto the image plane from the output node, which is this thing. And then you'll click on the standard shader itself, and then go up to this little blue dot, and that'll appear in the render or the viewport. But for this, I actually don't want that image. I want this one. So I'll click that. And by the way, this is going to be a pretty long tutorial, but I'll post timestamps in the description if you want to jump to any of it. So right off the bat, I understand I'm doing sci-fi. So I see a lot of kind of angular shapes, but also straight shapes at play. I see a lot of complexity, but also a lot of simplicity. So the reason sci-fi modelers often do this is just to offer variation, so you're not just staring at like freaking complexity like all the time and just getting bogged down in details. You want a lot of space for your eyes to rest, right? Otherwise it's going to look way too muddled in detail. So what I'm going to start with is I'm probably going to model something out that looks fairly similar to this. I'm going to use this as my main model to just go off of. So what I want to do is I want to get the general shape right away, so then we can add detail later. It's always important to do that pipeline, because otherwise you'll be adding detail where it's really not necessary and where maybe it doesn't line up with the angles. So it all depends on you with how you want to model, but what I usually do is I start with an image plane, or sorry, just a regular plane. You can press Control to get a square one, but I don't really care, so I'm just gonna do this. And you'll notice if you press F3 and F4, those get rid of the wireframes, make it transparent, whatnot. So I'm gonna convert to editable poly, and then I'm gonna go ahead and select my edges. I'm gonna Control backspace to get rid of those, otherwise you'll have floating verts or vertices. Okay, so I want to make sure I have the wireframe enabled so I can actually know what I'm doing. I usually choose a default color like gray. Okay, so I want to rotate it at a very vertical angle just so I can understand exactly what I'm doing here. So I note that the shape of it generally is angular, so I want to go ahead and go into my edge loops, or my edge mode, click and drag, marquee select these two lines, go to connect, and then make sure you have two. You want to just get the general shape of this, so I'm going to say, okay, so it's like a sort of sci-fi tunnel. So sci-fi tunnels always have this going on where it looks like a sphere or a spherical shape running down. So the only way to accomplish that is to make all the walls look a bit like this. Already you can see we have like a pretty solid shape going down. You want to go from major shapes to smaller shapes. That's like the rhetoric that everyone uses, just in general. It can be Substance Designer, it could be Substance Painter. Alright, so now I'm going to note how there's a lot of differentiation in the detail. So I'm going to go into line mode again. I'm going to note that this has a lip. It says 2 lips, so I'm going to make those 2 lips. Just that it's not going right from the wall to the ground. It has a little bit of buffer zone. Okay. And now, well, you can see I have too many lines, so I'm going to do 2. I'm going to stretch these out pretty far using the second modifier. And this is just going to create an additional lip. So I'm actually, and this will be simpler than what I'm going for, but it's just for the sake of your patience, really. Okay, so I'm going to say, okay, that's good. So I'm going to extrude this. So I'm just going to extrude it to get a lot of depth. Okay, let's see. And we always want to understand like why we're doing things. So why did I do this? Well, I could just have like a flat wall. That would be okay, but it wouldn't be spectacular. So I want to press Control and then Shift on the next one. And I want to be careful of what I'm actually doing. So you want to Alt click to get rid of these, because you're just creating a lip. You don't really want to extrude these. But the reason I'm doing this is just to create that additional sort of buffer between the ceiling and the wall. So this will be a nice piece, I think. Alright, so you have a lot of angles in sci-fi. Don't get too crazy with it, because then it'll become hard to texture with. So only do as much as you need to. Alright, so moving along, we have this little gizmo. I was going to make this a separate addition, just so that it is modular. Alright, so let's take a box. So we can have a plain version, and then we can have like another version, which would be cool. Again, I'm going pretty simple on everything. I like to work in orthographic views. Press Z to frame it, and by default they don't have the wireframe established, so you have to do that yourself. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just like eyeball it, and then I'll come in and attach it all together, and then create a line down the middle, and then reflect it, just so that it's like perfectly symmetrical. But if we don't really care about that, that's no big deal. Alright, so you want to size it pretty accurately to how it's going to be. And what I notice a lot of the time is, convert to editable poly, what I notice a lot of the time is sci-fi likes to have a lot of smooth edges, because it's actually interesting. In real life, it's really hard to get super clean cut edges. So what they do is they actually kind of just smooth it out to look as if it's a hard edge sometimes. Just a little bit of real world knowledge there, and that's kind of what 3D modeling is you have to apply a lot of real world knowledge. So I just chamfered this edge to create more lines and a lot of smoothness, and you can do this after the fact. You can click edges where you want them, where you don't want them. Alright. So like I said, this could be pretty simple. You're gonna have, you might have some n-gons, but these aren't n-gons, so just be careful if you have like a side that has like 8, or any polygon that has more than like 4 sides. You just want to be a little bit careful. I'm gonna go into border tool, marquee, select that, and then I'm going to close this off. Actually, before I do that, I'm gonna make this kind of like a control panel. So I'm gonna, what I did there is I just shift to create a new line, and then drag that out. And then I'm just gonna be kind of lazy, so I'm gonna do shift and then scale this all in. Go into wireframe mode, and just so that we can see that we're not selecting any verts behind it. And then go to weld. Make sure it's all the way there. Oh, Control Z if you don't want that. Okay, so click on it, move it around so you can see that it is in fact one vertex, so they're all conjoining up at one point. Okay, and we can edit this later, so we could be like, okay, we want it actually more down, more up, whatnot. Alright, so that's a pretty good start. So what we could do now is we see that oftentimes it'll have these like pipes. Pipes are always indicative of sci-fi, so what I do is we could either do a spline method or a cylinder. I'm just going to do a cylinder because it's, well, actually I'll do a line because it's actually simpler and easier to do. Okay, so when we click out a spline, what we're doing is we're clicking, dragging, we're pressing shift so it snaps to that, and then clicking again, and then right clicking, and that gives us our spline. But right off the bat it's not letting us see it, so you're gonna have to do enable and render, enable and viewport. adjust the thickness accordingly. And you could adjust how many sides you have, so it could be a triangle, it could be like this huge, like, I don't know why it would need to be that many polys. So I just stick with like about 9 or 10, because that gives it smoothness. Okay, and then I'm just going to click and drag it over here, working my orthographic front view. I'm going to press P to get back into perspective. Okay. And we don't want to be an exact copy, so that's why it's so cool to like kind of 3D model. You can add your own flair. You can be really original with it. Okay, so let's see. Also, the best way to do sci-fi, or the most realistic way I should say, is you always have an explanation as to why things are going into it. So if you have a cylinder kind of going into this control module, that looks kind of fine, but it doesn't have like a transition between the cylinder and this. It's just kind of like, oh, I just plopped it there, and like it looks okay, but it doesn't look as good as it could be. So what we want to do is we want to convert to editable poly, just so that we can add some edges. So I'm going to marquee select all the edges along this, and then I'm going to do connect. I'm going to go into F3 so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to have about 4 actually, and I can make it so that it'll have a transition. As you can see, it's off center, this whole thing, so I'll change that in a minute. But I'll press check mark. I'll go back into my orthographic view, or sorry, my wireframe mode, and then I'll scale these just so that they're equidistant. So that's about the same thickness, so that's good. And a lot of it is eyeballing, so don't feel bad if you're like, oh, I gotta get this perfect. Just like, good enough is the motto in the industry anyway. So alright, so now, and as you can see, this tutorial is like kind of more in depth, so again, if you want to go to those time codes or double speed the video. Okay, so right here you can see it looks a lot better because you actually have some, like, maybe you'll put like rivets here. It is a little bit low on the polygons, as you can see, but since this is just a wall, you're not really going to be focusing on it too much. If you do want more polygons, you have to go back and make this like maybe 14 sides in the spline editor. Okay, and like modular construction says, we want to have these two. If we want to add intrigue, you know how this is just kind of a flat, or well, it's not really dynamic, it kind of looks too generic. We can also come in here and we can select these vertices on top, make sure we're not selecting any others, and we want to push this back a little bit so it makes it look a little bit more intriguing rather than just like reflected like symmetry all the way across. Control Y to redo our step. Okay, and maybe this doesn't look good to you, but that's just like your opinion, man. Alright, so, and what we want to do is with our details, we want them to conform to the wall. So we wouldn't want this one being right up against this one, because that just defies what we just did, right? We want like details actually sliding along the wall. Okay, cool. So this is a good start. I'm actually going to keep it just like this. I'm not going to show you exactly how to do everything, but also what you want to do is you want to rotate this probably, just like I said, conforming our details. Don't worry about if this is intersecting. It won't really matter. Some people will tell you it does, but it really doesn't. Okay, use border tool, press shift, make a new line. As you can see, it's a wall, which is what you want. And you can do this, you can just do the same method we used, which is pressing shift and duplicating the wall. Doing this. I do this a lot, like this is most of my modeling. Okay, so it's not going to look as good as this because we simply don't have enough time, but this is good enough. So we want one wall like this. We probably want one wall like this, and I'll show you how to texture that, which will be cool. You want to make sure all your scaling lines up, all of just everything lines up in general, because otherwise your modular construction, all your hard work won't pay off. Okay, I really hate the colors, so I'm just going to use gray. Alright. I'll be shortly transitioning into Substance Painter. Alright. I'm going to line it up using F so we can see our front view. We can say that looks about good. A lot of it is just finessing. That's what a lot of modeling is, just kind of taking your time with it. Okay. Just so I don't confuse myself, I'm gonna go into here, the modifier list, and I'm gonna press shell. And this is going to allow it to be more of a box. So if you're ever in need of like having a shell, I'll demonstrate something really quick. So if I press F, go into line, let's say I have this beautiful looking like pipe. So we can always use modular pieces. You can modify this any way you want, but let's say you convert it to an editable poly. Let's say for some reason you wanted it hollowed out. Maybe it's like a vent or something. But you'll notice you can't really make it look like a pipe, right? So what you have to do is you have to deselect all these, go into modifier list, go to shell, and the inner amount is too much, so we're going to adjust that. Let's try this again. Shell. It's not liking me today, but that's okay. Let's see if it works. Usually this works a lot better. I don't know why I did that. What you could do is just go into border tool, go to bridge, it does that. So this looks pretty cool. I'm gonna add this as a modular piece. I'm only gonna show you how to texture these two though. You can add transition pieces where you want. So I'm gonna attach this all together. So I'm gonna go attach. Actually, before we do that, I'm gonna show you a really cool modifier. It's called an FFD. So FFDs allow you to basically modify the model in such a way that doesn't involve you like pressing or pulling a bunch of vertices, so it's a lot more streamlined. But it's only going to do so much for what we have with the poly count. So in other words, it's not going to do much if we don't have more segments. So I'm going to segment it a bit more. It's doing some funky things there. I should have done this before I added that. Okay, so that looks pretty good. We'll go into, deselect that, we'll go into the FFD. I'm going to use about like FFD 3x3x3, so this will offer us like a box we can play with rather than just like messing around with a bunch of vertices, which is so tedious, and this is such a godsend. So look at this, we could have like these cool shapes. We can like scale it out a bit more like that. Yeah, we could just make it look either cartoony, more like a shape that we like. You could do a lot with these. This looks kind of crappy, but so maybe it's not the best example, but still, we'll just keep it. Okay, and then what I like to do before I unwrap this, and also you can see we have stuff going on there. So let's fix that really quick. I'm going to attach these two because I'm just going to do the same thing to them, which is go into vertice mode, select those two, scale them out a bit, make it so it's like that. Looks a bit better. Okay, so I'm actually going to press F4, and as you can see we have this like horrible crap going on. So what we can do is we can select this, go to modify tab, go to polygons, go to Q, and then press all this. And what we could do is we could go to F4, and we can scroll down all the way to Auto Smooth. And this makes it look a bit better. This usually actually works a bit better, but the shape doesn't really allow it. So if we're in a rush, we could just be like, okay, we want like another box here. Sure, we're just gonna have another box. Doesn't matter what the box is, just something to disguise that ugly fact. That's what I do a lot. Like, it may look like I know what I'm doing, but I actually I literally just kind of guess. I'm like, oh, that looks kind of cool, and well, this doesn't look cool, but and then all the time you'll see you can press one side and then go into the ring and then do chamfer. Okay, and this is a prime example of n-gons. So if you don't want n-gons, then you just go into Q, F3, select both of them, press delete, use this thing, which I use all the time, just shift and then scale it in. Alright. Okay. That's good. Alright. So now I'm going to connect all of these, but first I'm going to attach them. It's going to turn everything as ugly blue. So always connect what walls you want together. So this is a good one, and then if I have like another wall that doesn't have this piece on it, I'm just going to shift, drag it out, object. Okay, and then go into hierarchy, effect pivot only, center to object, effect pivot only again, just so that it's centered. Okay, do the same thing to that. Always make sure it's at the center, otherwise you'll kind of regret it later when you're texturing it. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is kind of a controversial method of unwrapping, but before I do that, I'm going to end this video. Stay tuned for part 2. Have a good one.